Hello, so what I'm going to talk about today are the kidneys. You have two kidneys that are roughly kidney shaped. Going into the kidneys are the renal arteries. They supply the blood that needs to be cleaned into the kidneys. So these renal arteries are branches from the main blood vessel coming from your heart, which is the aorta. The blood going into the kidneys is oxygenated because the cells in the kidneys will need oxygen to function. Now, once the kidneys have cleaned the blood, the cleaned blood will exit via the renal veins, and those renal veins will reconnect into the larger blood vessel that's going back to the heart, which is called the vena cava. So the blood going back to the heart is deoxygenated, the cells having used up the oxygen. The blood has also now been cleaned, and any waste that is not wanted in the body has been removed. So that waste that is not been wanted has been removed by the kidneys, or has been excreted into these tubes called ureters. Let's label them. And the ureters connect into the bladder, which will then store the urine until it's ready to leave the body via the urethra. The kidneys are quite important. They filter around 120 to around 140 litres of blood per day. Even if you don't have, even if not both of them are functioning, you'll still be able to get by with just the one kidney. So let's now have a look at the kidneys in a bit more detail. So I'll start off by drawing the main kidney shape again. Coming out of that kidney is the ureter. Inside the kidney, these are connected to these things called renal pyramids, and this whole band here, this section here, is called the medulla. The outer band here is called the cortex, and it's in that area, in the cortex, in which the blood vessels, the arterioles and the capillaries are all located. So let's draw in the blood supply there, and of course we have the vein, which then splits off into smaller blood vessels as well. So that's in the cortex. So let's label the renal artery and the renal vein. Now, in an exam, of course, it won't be in colour, so the way you can tell which is which is by looking for arrows. And going into the kidneys is the renal artery, and coming out the renal vein, and down here you have the ureter. So I'm going to focus in on this area here on the next page. So let's start off by just drawing a line to show the division between the cortex and the medulla. So coming into the cortex, we have a blood vessel. This is probably an arteriole that will split into much smaller capillaries. And this bundle of capillaries is called a glomerulus. So let's label this thing here, glomerulus. Now what happens here in the glomerulus is filtration. So what does filtration mean? Well, things are filtered from the blood. It's extremely high pressure because the capillaries are much narrower than the arterioles that are supplying the blood into them. So the blood is actually under high pressure, and stuff is going to get squeezed out of the blood. Small molecules like glucose, urea, water, and salt are going to get squeezed out of the blood, so they are filtered out. The stuff that's filtered out is called filtrate, and that filtrate is collected into something called a renal capsule. It's also called a Bowman's capsule, named after the guy who discovered it. So this thing here is called a renal capsule. And that will collect all the stuff that's been filtered out. Now, the filtrate then goes on kind of a little journey through something called a tubule. There are around 1 million tubules per kidney, so it's quite a lot of them. and they're quite long and quite windy. So I'm just going to want to draw over that. And the function of this tubule is to reabsorb some of the stuff that's been filtered out. We don't want to get rid of everything that we filtered out. Some of the stuff is quite useful. So all the glucose will be reabsorbed. Most of the water and some of the salts will be reabsorbed. The urea will stay inside the tubule. Some water and some salt will also stay there. But a lot of it is reabsorbed. So it moves out of the tubule and eventually it will go back into the bloodstream. So let's just actually draw the arrow going all the way here. So the stuff that's left over now enters something called a collecting duct. So there'll be lots of branches coming from other tubules into this collecting duct, which will connect into the ureter, and it will then move down into the bladder. So the collecting ducts collect the leftover stuff, which is now urea, water and salt, and it's now called urine. So to summarise, the dirty blood comes into an area called the glomerulus, so the bunch of capillaries is called the glomerulus. Ultrafiltration happens here, where small molecules like urea, salt, water and glucose are filtered. Larger molecules like red blood cells and plasma proteins will stay in the blood. They're too big, they won't be filtered out. The urea, salt, water and glucose is now called filtrate, and it's gathered up into the renal capsule and moves into the tubule. In the tubule, useful stuff such as glucose, water and salt are reabsorbed back into the blood, and the stuff that's left over is collected into the collecting duct and excreted out as urine. If we have a look back here, we can see that this is where the urine will eventually be collected and stored in the bladder and out of the body through the urethra.